Let me roll the tape back a little bit to when President Biden came into office. And you may have to really take a deep breath to get there. But when we started, we faced what in our view were essentially four fundamental challenges. Our industrial base had been hollowed out, our middle class was fractured, and there was a growing inequality in the country. We were entering a new world of intense geostrategic competition, and the climate crisis was accelerating, and it demanded a just energy transition. Out of these challenges, an economic policy emerged, and it was one that cohered around a very simple, but somewhat, now in retrospect, I think, radical organizing principle, which is that the clean energy transition represents the single greatest opportunity for strategic growth, competition, and investment in at least a generation. And that principle gave birth to new laws, to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, to the Inflation Reduction Act, to the CHIPS and Science Act. And these weren't just climate bills, they were competitiveness bills, and they delivered. Together, they catalyzed more than $600 billion in private investment in American manufacturing. They helped to break ground on more than 450 new or expanded facilities, like some of the facilities that Lauren mentioned, battery plants, semiconductor fabs, critical minerals processing, all being built here, providing good jobs. And by the way, more than 70% of that investment was happening in red states. And because more than 85% of future emissions will come from outside the United States, from big, young, growing economies, places like India and Indonesia and South Africa, we had also recognized the opportunity and the imperative to partner with our allies overseas. The question for us was, how would those countries leap forward rather than getting locked into fossil infrastructure? And so that's why at the Development Finance Corporation, we grew our climate investment portfolio from $450 million in year one to close to $4 billion in year three, and again in year four. We financed geothermal projects in Kenya and in Indonesia, solar and storage in Malawi, solar panel production and supply chain inputs in India. We set the groundwork for developing an entire new trading corridor across Central Africa designed to get the battery materials like lithium and magnesium and cobalt from countries that were wealthy in those and bring those to market by exporting to the West. We backed debt for nature swaps in Ecuador, in Belize, in El Salvador, in Gabon. These were programs that allowed countries to cancel national debt in exchange for conservation commitments. And in Ukraine, we invested nearly $1 billion during the war to keep banks open and the energy grid resilient, because their independence depended on breaking a reliance on Russian oil and gas. We partnered with an agency that's no longer really there, with USAID, to build catalytic blended finance tools. One of my favorites was the guarantee fund that we financed in Kosovo that helped workers to lease electric vehicles and homeowners to install solar and efficient appliances in their homes. These were not giveaways. They were not inefficiencies. And they weren't fraud. They delivered financial returns to the US taxpayer, and even more importantly, they demonstrated our American values. We were providing an alternative to help our partners resist the kind of authoritarian coercion and manipulation on offer from Russia and China. At the National Security Council, we made the case that climate resilience is national security, that when floods shut down ports or fires threaten grids or heat waves ground planes, that the economy takes a hit and our strategic posture suffers. And so that's why we fought for investments in resilience at home and abroad. We knew that every dollar spent on resilience could save $6 in disaster response. And that's why major multinationals from Arup to AECOM to McCormick to Danone the list goes on, are already building resilience into their business models. So that is a story of the last 4 years, one where we built things, where we worked across agencies, we dealt with our partners around the clock, even when we didn't really want to, and we showed that you don't have to choose between economic growth and climate action. Now, was everything perfect? No, of course not. We moved fast, but we didn't move fast enough. Permitting, too slow. And while public servants, many of the public servants that I worked with were brilliant, tireless, dedicated, the systems in which they operated were, no doubt, outdated and cumbersome. So we need reform, and we need to make building easier and more urgent. But there's a difference between identifying what needs fixing and tearing the whole thing down. Instead of building coalitions and grounding work in core values like transparency or the rule of law, this administration is taking an easier path, a dangerous path of retreating. And they're not tweaking around the edges. They're shutting down programs that deliver for Americans and for Angelinos. We saw what DOGE has done to USAID. Now you see that they're firing thousands of scientists from EPA, from NOAA, from NIH. EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin has announced that he will seek to strip California's authority to implement stronger clean car and truck standards, simultaneously depriving the 11 other states who follow California's lead to the right to have clean air. Many of you in this room, I suspect, have worked with FEMA in the Palisades or in Altadena. Well, this week, DOGE began reshaping DHS, and they're coming for FEMA next. This is not about efficiency. When you eliminate teams like FEMA's BRIC program, the Building Resilience in Communities program, that delivers 5-to-1 returns in avoided disaster costs, you can't do that in the name of efficiency. That brings me to home, to Los Angeles, because 2 weeks before the end of the term, the Palisades and Eaton fires changed this place forever. And among the thousands of homes that burned was my mother's and my childhood home on El Medio Avenue in the Palisades. What I saw in the days after was heartbreaking, but it was also deeply inspiring. People didn't wait. They started organizing. Neighbors holed up in hotels, on couches, on long calls, on Zoom meetings. They were building the scaffolding of recovery, and they chose community. And that's what I've been focused on in recent weeks, supporting this extraordinary civic response, supporting leaders like Steve Soberoff and the Rebuild LA group, pushing for smarter, faster rebuilding, Rob Jernigan and Team Palisades, building block by block, organizing infrastructure, Tom Soto, who I think I see, and Mariam Czar, and a coalition of doers who secured a new home for Pali High in a matter of months, Patty Raderman and Io Wright, who created Post-Fire LA to provide resources for survivors, Christine Kwan, my colleague at Department of Angels, who has been the architect of so much of what we're building. The architects, by the way, at UCLA and the City Lab team, Dana Cuff, designing pathways to preserve history and equity in Altadena. Aloe Black in Altadena, working to organize the existing and emergent community organizations. Resilience veterans like Mary Nichols and Matt Peterson and Jonathan Parfrey, I think I see Jonathan, working to embed undergrounding and resilience into long-term infrastructure plans. I could go on, but I won't because I'll start offending people by leaving them out. And then a new group that I've had a privilege to support, the Department of Angels. And we're not a government agency, as Jim indicated. We are a civic network, but we are showing up where government has fallen short, building the infrastructure for community organizations to sustain a long-term recovery and to advocate for the policies that survivors need. It's about giving people, as Jim said, the dignity of navigating this recovery on their own terms. And it gives us hope that with the right support, new change makers can lead even after the fires took everything from them. In an era where efficacy is questioned and cynicism prevails, this community has demonstrated a fierce resilience. That same spirit, the determination to rebuild, stayed with me from a visit that I took to Kyiv in 2023, and I'll close with this. We had just sat down for a meeting at Ukrenergo. Ukrenergo is the national grid operator. You could think of them as a nationalized version of SoCal Edison, or maybe LIDWP. We had just sat down, and we're 5 minutes into the meeting, and the air raid sirens went off, about 10 in the morning. We didn't really know what to do, but suddenly we were whisked into a bunker, and honestly, it was frightening. But when we got into that bunker, what we found was unforgettable. Over 100 Ukrenergo employees sitting shoulder to shoulder, laptops open, iPhones lighting up their faces, coordinating dispatch, tracking outages, managing energy flows, working as one team without missing a beat. They were rebuilding their country under fire, underground, but together. And that moment never left me. If they can carry on under those circumstances, surely we can too under ours. And if they can keep building, defending, and when they get hit, repairing, so can we. That's the kind of resilience that animates the people of Altadena, the Palisades, Los Angeles. It's what we've invested in for the last years in Washington. It's what the Verde Exchange community brings to this moment as a beacon for the rest of the world to come to Los Angeles and California as a leader, a change maker for clean energy and climate action. And if it speaks to you, then I hope you'll check out the Department of Angels and find out how you can join what we're doing. Thank you.